Iran's supreme leader is dead, his son has taken the throne, and the war that was supposed to end fast is now threatening the world's oil lifeline. What looked like a decapitation strike has turned into something far more dangerous, a succession crisis, a regional escalation, and a global energy shock happening at once. This matters right now because the fighting is no longer just about Iran and Israel. It is already moving through oil prices, shipping routes, and political risk worldwide. On March 8th, Iranian state media said the Assembly of Experts chose Mojtaba Khamenei, son of the late Ali Khamenei, as Iran's new supreme leader. That appointment answered one question inside Tehran, but it raised another outside it: whether the new leadership will harden Iran's war posture instead of stabilizing it. Reuters reports Mojtaba's rise signals that hardliners remain firmly in control, backed by powerful security networks and the Revolutionary Guards. At the same time, Israeli and U.S. pressure has not eased. The campaign continues, and public statements from Washington have pointed to more Iranian officials as potential targets. That means Iran is not simply choosing a leader in wartime. It is choosing a leader under direct threat, with the state's survival and credibility tied to his first moves. On the ground, the war has already widened beyond elite politics, with strikes on Tehran and other targets showing that civilian infrastructure and strategic industry are now part of the battlefield. One of the clearest signals came from attacks linked to oil facilities in Tehran, where flames over storage sites became a visual warning that energy is now a weapon in this war. Iran's answer has been to keep firing back, using missiles, drones, and regional pressure to show that removing top leaders does not automatically break the system beneath them. That is the central miscalculation now haunting Washington, the belief that a spectacular opening blow would collapse Iran's command structure in days. Instead, the conflict is entering a harsher phase where symbolic victories matter less than endurance, supply chains, and the ability to absorb punishment without losing cohesion. And once endurance becomes the test, the most important front may not be in Tehran at all, but in the narrow waters where global energy markets can be choked. Because the next chapter of this war is not just about who rules Iran, but about whether the Strait of Hormuz becomes the lever that turns a regional war into a global economic crisis. The real pressure point is the Strait of Hormuz, the narrow corridor that carries roughly a fifth of the world's oil and LNG trade. Once that choke point is disrupted, the war stops being a distant military story and starts hitting refineries, shipping schedules, inflation forecasts, and household fuel bills. Reuters reported Iraqi oil production had already collapsed by about 70% as the conflict blocked access through Hormuz and froze tanker movement. That is why this conflict is so dangerous. It weaponizes geography, and geography does not care who started the war or who claims moral victory. Oil prices reacted immediately, with Brent and WTI both surging above $111 a barrel as traders priced in a prolonged supply shock. In a matter of days, the strategic question shifted from can Iran survive the strikes to how much economic pain can the world absorb if this corridor stays unstable. And oil is only part of the danger, because the Gulf also depends on fragile desalination networks that keep entire cities alive in one of the driest regions on Earth. AP reports more than 90% of desalinated water in the region comes from just 56 plants, many of them exposed to missile, drone, or cyber disruption. That means the war is now threatening not just fuel flows and shipping insurance, but drinking water, electricity, and the basic resilience of Gulf states hosting U.S. forces. Iran understands this leverage perfectly, which is why its strategy is no longer limited to direct retaliation. It is about spreading uncertainty across every vulnerable node. Missile math is becoming central, because Iran has finite stocks, but so do its enemies, and interception campaigns burn through expensive defenses at a punishing rate. This is the kind of war where even partial survival can feel like strategic success if the other side pays enough in money, instability, and political credibility. That is why early battlefield headlines can mislead. A dramatic strike may win the news cycle, while the slower damage accumulates in ports, utilities, insurance markets, and public fear. For Washington, the nightmare scenario is no longer simply escalation with Iran, but a wider regional breakdown that punishes allies faster than it changes Tehran's behavior. And that brings the story to its next and most uncomfortable question. If military pressure is not breaking Iran quickly, what happens when politics inside the United States start turning against the war? The next battlefield may be inside the United States, where wars are not lost only by firepower, but by rising casualties, higher prices, and collapsing public patience. Reuters and Ipsos found that only 27% of Americans backed the strikes on Iran, while 43% opposed them, and many said casualties or fuel spikes would erode support further. That is a warning sign for any White House trying to sell a long war, because the public may tolerate a sudden blow, but not an open-ended drain with no clear exit. Reuters also reported that the dangers for Washington and for Trump have multiplied after the first week, as battlefield risk, market stress, and political exposure all rose together. The problem is not simply whether the United States can hit Iran harder, but whether harder blows would actually produce surrender before the strategic costs spiral outward. Every additional day of conflict now carries three separate bills at once: military strain, energy inflation, and diplomatic damage among allies already nervous about regional collapse. Even if Tehran absorbs more strikes, Mojtaba Khamenei's appointment suggests the leadership transition has not fractured the regime in the way Washington may have hoped. In fact, the succession appears to have hardened the message coming from Tehran. This is no longer only a military confrontation, but a test of who blinks first under systemic pressure. That makes regime collapse a far weaker short-term assumption than it looked in the opening hours, when decapitation strikes seemed capable of ending the war quickly. And once quick victory fades, the balance shifts toward endurance, stockpiles, shipping resilience, alliance discipline, and domestic political stamina. This is why the war now looks less like a clean campaign and more like a trap, one where tactical success can coexist with strategic deterioration. The United States and Israel can still inflict enormous damage, but damage alone is not the same as control, especially when oil routes, regional infrastructure, and global markets are all unstable. Iran, meanwhile, does not need a perfect victory to change the strategic picture. It only needs to survive, retaliate selectively, and keep the price of war rising. So the central question now is no longer who struck first or even who struck harder, but which side can still claim a path to victory after the economic and political backlash fully arrives. And that is the darkest possibility in this story. The war may continue not because anyone has a clear plan to win, but because every exit now looks weaker than escalation.